thought that was very, very difficult.
Sure.
And sometimes I have the need to ask myself, what is happening to me? But this is not shaman.
Yeah, of course we have very strong habits and very strong voice, and it'll take time for us to be for that to dominate us. But every time we can manage to simply observe that strong voice and a little bit not get caught up in it, already slowly over time that strong voice will subside. So it'll take time, and not to expect that from one day to the next we'll be able to be present and observe those strong voices that are normally there and it won't bother us. That's not going to happen overnight, but the more that we just patiently observe them, and you'll find over time, slowly, we'll be able to just be present with them, and that voice will get slowly weaker and weaker. But it'll take time. So that's okay, just be patient.
Is it valuable to teach?
Is it what, sorry?
Is it valuable?
Valuable?
Yeah, to teach kids to meditate. I have those two grandson and daughter. When they are reading, you can do anything. They don't hear, they don't nothing. They are very in one focus. How do you say in one focus?
One pointed, yeah.
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 Can I do anything?
Yeah. Of course, and it's very unfortunate, but it seems to be changing slowly that mindfulness or meditation is not in the normal school curriculum. It's starting slowly, and that's a good thing. And just a little story about that. I had a German school teacher who came to my course in India a couple of years ago, and it was just an introduction to Buddhism, and we did mindfulness, and he thought, wow, this is a good idea. I'll bring that into my school kids class, because he was teaching primary school children. And he said one of the difficult things at the start of the class to settle the kids down, because they were sort of very, hyper, and said it was difficult. So what he did was he introduced 3-minute little mindfulness exercise, and he made it creative, because the trick is to make it interesting for the kids. If you say, sit there and observe your breath or something, maybe they're not going to be so interested. So he was very creative in how he did that, and he started doing that. He said the transformation in the kids was just unbelievable. And he said after a while of doing this, the kids started to demand that he start the class in that way. They were asking him, please start with this, because they saw the benefit. And so then he wanted to, give this to the other teachers, but I think the headmaster was a bit conservative, and so he thought he was a bit worried about bringing this to the headmaster, because he thought, this is some religious stuff or something. So what he did was he had the idea, he videoed this exercise with his kids at the start of class, and then he showed it to the headmaster, and he said the headmaster's jaw dropped, and he said, can you teach this to the other teachers? So I think this is how we can do it. We need to be very creative in how we present it, but I think if we present it in a good way, for me it's like an essential part of the education. Our education system in normal doesn't prepare children very well for life, and this I think is an essential component of that. And if we can really bring it in a suitable form, I think it can be a huge benefit to kids. Okay. Yeah.
Just wanted to share that I was involved recently in editing a book just in Israel now, sitting still at frog.
Sorry?
Sitting still at frog.
Yeah.
That is actually mindfulness for kids.
Mm-hmm.
So it exists now every year.
Yeah, very good, very good. Yeah, I think we're slowly seeing it coming in, but it needs to be a bit of a revolution, I think. Okay. Yeah. Just one or two more points, then we'll take a break, and then we'll go straight back into meditation when we come back. In this practice, we used an analogy. One analogy for this practice of observing the mind and the thoughts is like the mind is like the sky, and the thoughts are like clouds moving through the sky. Sometimes another analogy used is that the mind is like the stage, and the thoughts are like actors on the stage. And another one is that the mind is like a screen, and the thoughts are like the movie that's shown on the screen. So what we can see here is we can have these two aspects. We can have what's often called the foreground and the background. So the background is the mind itself, the space of the mind where all of these mental events arise. So the mental events are the foreground, and some mental events are more objective in nature and some are more subjective in nature. So the more objective mental events are something like discrete thoughts, memories, images. The more subjective ones are things like emotions, desires, moods, and so forth. And often when we're looking at the foreground, at the mental events, because these tend to be more subjective emotions and stuff, they're sort of quite sticky, quite close to us. So we often don't tend to notice these. It's more easy to notice these. So in the next meditation after the break, we are going to start by looking at these types of mental events, i.e. discrete thoughts, images, memories, and then we're going to move to specifically looking for subjective mental events, like emotions, moods, desires, and so forth. And then what we're going to do at the end of the meditation is we're going to focus on the background, the space within which all of these mental events arise. And with this space, and then I'd just like to read something regarding this before we take the break, is that, again, if we are sitting quietly in meditation, and I mentioned this already yesterday, I think, is the sense of me is constantly reinforced by solid sense of body. But if we're sitting very quietly in meditation, focusing on the mind, often this solid sense of body can almost completely dissipate, vanish. And then our sense of me is also constantly being reinforced by the mental events. And so if the mind goes quiet, and then there's just the stillness there, and there's no strong sense of body, then often when we have this experience, there's often a lot of fear arising because of that. So I want to talk about that, and to introduce that, I'd like to read a little bit again from the Attention Revolution book. He talks about this fear. It's on page 100. He says, "One of the more common challenges in this practice is the emergence of fear. As you release your grip on the contents of the mind, you are undermining your normal sense of personal identity, which is constantly reinforced by thinking, by recalling, and identifying with your personal history, hopes, and plans. Now you are disengaging from these familiar supports for substantiating your ego. As lapses between thoughts occur more and more frequently and for longer periods, your awareness hovers in a kind of empty space, a vacuum devoid of personhood. You may come into the grip of fear as your normal sense of who you are loses its footing. The teacher Genlam Rinpa warned his students that such dread may well arise in their training. It is crucial, he counseled, not to identify with it nor give it any credence. Some kinds of fear are based in reality. They protect us from danger, filling the body with energy so that we can flee or protect ourselves in whatever way necessary. But this kind of dread with no clear object has no such basis in reality. There is no danger in the empty, luminous space of awareness. You have nothing to lose but your false sense of an independent, controlling ego. The only thing being threatened is an illusion. If you don't identify with it, there's nothing to fear. If you do identify with this fear, it may bring your entire practice to a grinding halt and throw you into deep emotional imbalances. So it is of utmost importance to observe such fear without distraction and without grasping. Keep to the essentials of the practice. So that's something that is quite common in this practice as our mind becomes more still, that there's nothing then in that experience of stillness, particularly if we don't have a strong sense of body anymore, to substantiate this sense of me. So therefore this experience, again, there's nothing to fear here, because the fact that fear is arising means you exist. So the instruction here is, like any other mental event, simply observe that arise and pass. Don't get caught up in it. But that experience that there's still somehow an agent here, but there's no sense of body, no sense of mental content, if we're very intuitive, that's leading us to realize what is our true nature, that we're not really our body and all of those thoughts. So that's leading us into the Vipassana practice. So that's what we're going to do in the next session. We're going to start with that meditation, the same meditation, but we're going to begin by looking at the more objective type of mental events, that is thoughts, mental images and memories. And then we're going to move to specifically focusing on subjective mental events like emotions, mental afflictions, desires and so forth. And then at the end we're simply going to rest in the space of the mind, the stillness of the mind, where all of these mental events arise. So that's for the beginning of the next session. Any question about that before we break? Yeah.
What are the objective and subjective foreground? What are they exactly?
The background is the space of the mind, and the foreground is all the mental events that arise in that space.
Yes, but the objective and the subjective ones, what are
The mental events tend to be more objective in nature or more subjective in nature. The more objective in nature mental events are things like images, memories, and discrete thoughts. They tend to be more objective, and then things like emotions, moods, desires tend to be more subjective in nature. Okay, let's take a break and come back at 5 o'clock, and we'll go straight back into the practice.